When it comes to defending yourself with a knife, you want to have options that work well for you and your physical attributes, something that you have confidence to be able to pull off. So if you're trying a particular technique that doesn't feel quite right, what you want to do is look for something that fits that same requirement as far as performance characteristics, but maybe it gives you other options that are more appropriate to your body type. So for example, one of the things that we'll look at, training knife and training hammer. Awesome. When we look at typical type of attack with an impact weapon here, what we would consider to be an angle 1, high forehand strike coming to the head. One of the things we've looked at before is the idea of a meet for an angle 1. You may look at that and say, you know what, that's a lot of stuff going on. I really don't feel comfortable with that. The idea of stopping his arm with one arm of mine, if you're of smaller stature, it may not be a good fit for you. Well, one of the things we try to do with martial blade concepts is make sure that we always give people options as far as tools that work well for them. If one arm isn't strong enough, what you want to do is look at the idea of being able to use 2 arms. So what we do is we actually borrow from some of the empty hand technique that we do. We use a technique called a shoulder stop. So if Eric is trying to strike me here, the rotation of his body is what really powers his strike. If I can stop the rotation of his body, specifically stop the movement of his shoulder, I take a lot of the steam out of his strike. So when he goes to strike, I'm simply stopping this with my shoulders here. Now, one of the instinctive things that you'll find, people will try to push people away. If you watch videos of people being attacked, you'll see in a lot of cases people trying to push folks away. The problem is if I do this straight on toward his spine, I bracket myself at exactly the wrong distance as far as getting hit. If he's trying to hit me here and I'm doing this, I'm screwed. But if I simply turn my body to stop his shoulder, and now this hand stops his arm, he swings, you can see that motion, pretty powerful. Shuts him down very quickly. And what this also does is it uses the skeletal structure of my arms versus muscular strength. So again, when you're talking about people of smaller stature who might have to up the ante a little bit, or even bigger guys who are worried about guys who are bigger than them, same thing applies. So we look at the empty hand side of this, the ability to stop this and then say fire knees, whatever else it might be. We've got options that work really well with this particular technique. Well, because it works so well, we also look at that and say, okay, I can also apply that with my knife. The initial defense works great. Then what I want to do is be able to finish it with the action of the knife. When you're practicing this, when I'm doing this to Eric here with the palm, large surface area, nice and soft, still jarring for him as you can see, but it's not painful. When I switch to the knife and I'm using my fist instead, we have to back off the intensity because what I'm doing is basically punching him in the deltoid every time. That gets old real quick, okay? So he attacks, I'm stopping him here. Again, we're not illustrating that with as much force simply because he's my training partner and I don't want to hurt him. Now where we go from here, once we stop this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab his hand. And when I grab, what I want to do is not grab the wrist itself, where my hand can slide around his wrist. I want to make sure that I cover a portion of the flat of his hand here. Easy way to do that, I simply track down and let part of this cover here. What that does is it makes sure that I can rotate the axis of his arm. So again, he comes in, I stop it here. I step in, and I want to bring the back of his hand down to touch my hip. What this does is it rotates his arm, locks his shoulder, and very importantly, you notice now the inside of his arm here is smiling at me. This is facing upward. My knife simply tracks down now to this position. What we've got here is the bicep. We've got all the nerves that allow his brain to control the rest of his arm. We've also got his brachial artery, which is 10% of his blood flow. And what we look at from this position here is to simply sink and cut. And you can hear that groan coming out of Eric when I did that. I'm not just cutting with my arm. This is not an isolated motion of my arm. I'm literally sticking my elbow to my ribs and sinking body weight. So again, I stop, step forward, and I pressure cut through that. Even with a heavy jacket on, you can cut with lots of power, be able to get through that jacket. If the first one doesn't work, no problem. I stop it here. I can cycle through this several times if necessary, if it's, again, heavy clothing. From here, I thrust, cut, mobility kill with the comma cut, the way we always do in NBC, and essentially at that point, my problem is done. He should be falling to the ground at that point because he can no longer support weight on that leg. Let's do it shown from this side. So again, shoulder stop here, I step forward. You can see here my elbow is tight to my ribs. There's that pressure cut. I sink my body. I'm not moving my arm. It's an independent motion here. I'm literally using my body weight. And if I have to cycle through that, I can. I thrust here. Comma cut, nice extension here. You can see his toes popping up. I'm cutting with full power of my body here. And at this point, I could literally just walk through and go. So if we put those pieces together, do-si-do, please. It's a very, very powerful technique. And what's really important about it is if you think about the knives you can actually carry. This is particularly important for people who live in Chicago, live in Boston, live in other areas where there are strict blade length limitations. If all you've got is a 2.5-inch blade, you need to make sure you have good body mechanics behind that that allow you to really cut with power. As you can see here, the pressure cuts to the arm, the comma cut to the leg. It allows you to survive the initial attack using good, essentially empty hand technique, and then immediately transition to the use of the knife to be able to finish the job. Putting those pieces together gives you a really powerful defensive technique.